really what I'm most interested in is how do we build exceptional teams? How do we scale businesses that are looking to become hopefully the next LinkedIn or the next Google? And how do we do that in a highly competitive environment with wide ranges of people and skills and roles and a lot of different solutions vying to become the next dominant player. So on the panel today, joined, I'll sort of go down the list here, is Alex Deve. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Alex. Founder and CEO of White Truffle, which is a really exciting company in the space, and I'm pretty excited to hear Alex's presentation, and he's going to talk a lot more about what they're up to. Mark Hogue, who's the co-founder and CEO of Venture Rocket and Crowd Vitae. Sharoy Desai, an old friend, and really glad that he's on the panel here with me as well, is co-founder and CEO of Guild. And lastly, Dan Shapiro, who's the Vice President of Talent Solutions at LinkedIn, who some of you may have heard of. So with that, I'm going to, I guess, launch into my presentation. So, and I'll forewarn everyone, we at Highland are very excited to be involved in VLab, and again, was flattered to be involved in the panel, but started thinking about this exactly 1 week ago. So you're getting some very quick and real-time feedback. So, so very simply, thoughts on talent, and I'll dive into this, and we're going to have a chance to answer questions and talk about some of these hopefully later as the panel progresses. So. So my background quickly, I've, as I said, 8 years at Highland, really have spent my entire career in the venture world as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as an executive recruiter, and now kind of a combination of all of those in my current role. So I've spent a long time doing that, 20 plus years. Both in Boston and spending a lot of time, as I'm taking the red eye back tonight, between the two coasts, as well as working in London for another venture-backed company. So, and spent a lot of time in New York City as well, which is another interesting hotspot market dynamic with all its own mechanisms there. And I think this last point, and I was really glad that Mark made the point when we did our call, is really, like, I am super passionate about this stuff. I think that it's a big problem. It's a meaningful role. I think that all of these companies and all of you here are interested in this topic. It's a big, important area for our economy, and certainly for all the entrepreneurs that are innovating in all these key areas. It's all about the people, and it's critically important. And for me personally, I get an enormous benefit out of helping people with their careers. It's kind of like the dirty little secret of my role is I get more than I give. And it's a wonderful role to be a part of that. So I'm certainly excited to talk more about it, and hopefully you all are excited to hear more about it. So Highland Capital, who are we? We've been around for 26 years. We were founded in Boston, and more recently have moved to Silicon Valley in quite a substantial fashion, and have a number of very exciting companies here, primarily in the Bay Area. We manage a shade over $3 billion in total funds. We're currently investing out of Fund 9. We have offices here in Menlo Park, soon to be Palo Alto, which we're very excited to be moving down here. And Cambridge, Massachusetts, right in Kendall Square, and Shanghai, which is another very interesting market and an exciting talent challenge there, because as frenetic as things are in the Valley right now, China is even more frenetic. It's really remarkable to see what's happening. We do early stage investing as well as growth investing, and we're looking for big swings in some of these sectors. And I listed a few here: Aereo, Handybook, Hourly Nerd, and these are big swing for the fences types of companies. We want entrepreneurs that think big, that want to go change an industry, and want an investing partner that can be alongside them for that journey. So And we've got 80 plus portfolio companies. So we've seen this movie of scaling growth and hopefully some exits multiple times. Talent is the whole kit and caboodle here. And I put this slide up recognizing that, as someone pointed out, we're excited about the US team, but there's plenty of other good World Cup teams out there. So it could be a subjective title to the slide, but we're 1-0 right now, so we're excited. And so you've got a wonderful lineup of these exceptional athletes that you know, there's a whole system, a feeder system that selects these people over time. But the funny thing to me was you've got this fellow, John Brooks, in the upper right-hand corner, who was a late addition and an alternate who ends up, you know, heading in the winning goal against Ghana. And it's remarkable. And to some extent, I sort of feel like we all want to find the Clint Dempseys and these wonderful players, but we're also looking for the John Brooks. You know, these are role players, people who can really make an impact when a company's at a critical juncture. And it's hard to find people like John Brooks, and we're hopeful that we'll find some more. The hiring system is broken today, and you know, it's a little bit dramatic, but it's true. And I think in particular here in the Bay Area, in Boston and New York, it's particularly strained. You've got companies that are well-funded, that are large and small, vying for a very small pool of talent. So we'll talk a lot about scale. It's difficult to scale these businesses. It's hard to find great talent. We've got some great companies that are doing things very innovatively to find better talent and find those hard-to-find people. We've got intermediaries and service providers that provide services to this, and they're really good, they're really expensive, and it's a challenge to be able to use those every time. I don't think we're optimized for outcomes. It's a crazy thing that we still don't sort of police ourselves in a fashion to sort of make hires and be accountable to the outcomes, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's all that matters are the outcomes. There's very little data. Again, some of these companies are changing that, but it's remarkable in the hiring process today, whether it's a bleeding edge startup or a large company, how little data is actually deployed in the process from start to finish. And it's, you know, there's a huge opportunity there, but there's a huge challenge because there's people that are using these and they have to be comfortable with the solutions at the end of the day. I mentioned about the coasts. You know, just a couple, I mean, I was on the airplane 2 days ago, and I mean, this has broad implications, right? I mean, and it's hard to know which is the cause and which is the effect, but you know, people are thinking about education differently to optimize for the outcome of a job. I mean, Udacity and AT&T offering this nano degree, there are some big things that can happen that are going to change the workforce supply and dynamic in the market. And so it's happening at multiple levels, not just within the talent, human capital management ecosystem that we all play in. There's a ton of solutions out there, and you know, one of my challenges as an investor and working at a firm that considers investments is there's a lot of noise. There are a lot of companies that are promising great things, and I was saying to one of the panelists early, some of them are addressing very small slivers of the overall pie, and it's hard to imagine how that's going to become a big breakout company. So we'll talk about some of these areas, but there's many different areas where there's innovation happening, and hopefully we'll talk about some of these today. You know, I found this quote in talking to another startup in this space who mentioned that, you know, the algorithms work, and A, the algorithms work, B, people aren't doing a great job of hiring. It's you know, it's something that it's amazing. You go into companies that have very little framework to evaluate talent, to interview, to capture data, to compare compensation information, to reference check, to share that data. It's remarkable. So applying technology in a thoughtful way, there's a huge opportunity here, and it's being demonstrated by some data that our friends across the country are studying. Everyone knows this. There's a lot of activity in this space, which is really exciting for these companies, and I think for all of us. There's money flowing into the category, and there is liquidity and exits in this market, which is really critical for all of us that are excited about that. That said, you can count on one hand the number of billion-dollar standalone companies in this category, and I think that's something I want to talk more about where the next big play is going to come from. There's some emerging niches that I think is really interesting, I think for startups overall, but in this category in particular, which is they're beachhead opportunities where you can address a small population and then extend more broadly from there. And I think that we're seeing solutions to address some of these categories, and it's really exciting to see. And there's many others. In fact, Alex dropped a couple as we were talking that are really exciting. There's a bunch of different models to address this. There's obviously advertising and SaaS, and marketplace is an area that I think is really exciting at the moment, and it's being applied to the talent category, and it'll be interesting to watch to see if that's a scalable long-term solution to this. There's even some interesting ways that people are basically selling equity in their own careers and their own future earning flows, and that's a very exciting area and somewhat potentially controversial. There's this classic dilemma of revolutionary versus evolutionary. We all want the next great leap forward, but sometimes it's too far of a leap, and companies can't deploy these solutions effectively, and people don't want to use these solutions if they're so unfamiliar with them. So that's a constant balance that I look for when I look at companies. I want that big, bold play, but the reality is it still needs to be sold into a corporation, or a consumer needs to engage with it. So can you have that revolutionary leap is a big question. And I'll just end on this slide. Some other ideas I was reading on the plane ride over, the wonderful LinkedIn Reed's Series B presentation that he published in a great blog post that I would encourage all of you to read if you haven't. And he had this great quote of "the network enables revenue." And it seems so obvious to us now with all these other services, these viral services, but at the time it wasn't obvious. And there were a lot of companies that were doing things very differently, trying to be enterprise software solutions, and the big behemoths in this category were built solving Fortune 1000's problems and having them pay a lot of money. Is there going to be a Netflix, an Uber, a Tinder of jobs? Of course there are, and there are companies trying to do that today. Will they scale? Will they break through and become that large company? I don't know, and it'll be fun to watch. There was another, in that same HBR article, there was a wonderful concept of measuring potential versus experience, which I think is a very powerful concept, but also candidly confuses things even more. How do you measure potential, right? I mean, it's hard enough to measure experience and to have a lingua franca where everyone can communicate. Now we're talking about potential. We all talk about high potentials or high pos, but it's different when your hiring process is now optimized for that. FICO score for talent. I mean, now we're starting to really think about automating things. It's like that ING ad where they're wearing their retirement number on their, it follows them around. I mean, can you imagine if your FICO score of how employable you are in a certain category followed you around? I love the $0 billion markets. I'm blown away. I was an analyst at the Yankee Group back in the day, so we used to talk about $0 billion markets where people were telling us the greatest thing in the world, but no one was buying it. And there are plenty of $0 billion markets that could be $10 billion markets. And it's just going to be a flip of a switch when people start to use assessment tools en masse, and that becomes a huge category perhaps. Try before you buy. We've got an exciting company called Hourly Nerd where you can basically rent an MBA. It's really exciting idea, and there's opportunities to convert those people that you've tried on a consulting basis to say, hey, Jen or John, you've done a great job and we'd like to hire you now. So that's another big idea maybe we can talk about. And vertical specific solutions. Again, we were talking about this, nailing your patch and doing that so effectively with a compelling value proposition, and then being able to extend that out to other adjacent markets is a great way to launch a business. So hopefully I didn't take too much of your time, but that's just a few thoughts in a week. So I'm going to, thank you. So I'm going to invite Alex to come up and to give your presentation.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alex Deve. I'm the CEO and co-founder of White Truffle. It's this little pig is actually our logo. We're a very daring startup. pig as a logo, French CEO. It's going to go well. White Truffle is a marketplace for tech talent. It's basically a dating site for jobs. And the story of it, you've heard that many times, is I was around, all my friends were telling me they can hire people, they can raise money, sorry, but they can't hire people. And that was the big problem. And that was true actually all over the place. It was true here in the US, it was true in Silicon Valley, it was true on the East Coast, it was also true back in France. So I was figuring out what I was going to do with my life besides watching soccer games. And I started looking at the employment space. And a lot of people have talked about this, actually, about how 3 years ago you had a very high unemployment rate. And at the same time, which was very big paradox, you had a very high number of open jobs. And a lot of people have wrote about this, and everybody is pretty agrees that the solution clearly involves education, and there's plenty of innovation there. Involves immigration, and there's plenty of work done at the policy level. But also, it has to involve discoverability. It's too hard today to get a job, or it's too hard today to get somebody to do work for you. And the problem with discoverability is that it is way too noisy. You're going to hear that word from me so many times. Noisy. It's what's really killing the recruiting market today. Right now, what's happening is people go on services, they search for candidates, they find 100 candidates, they send emails to all those candidates, and these candidates are getting spammed, and they don't respond, and it's a very poor experience. And then you also have those candidates who are going on those job boards, sending their resumes, they never hear anything, and the pile of resumes at the HR department in the company gets higher and higher and higher, and people ignore them. That's just a very, very bad experience. And that started to get very, very interesting. And then the second thing is also that recruiting is extremely transactional. If you work with a recruiting firm, or if you work with a firm that gets fees from placing you, then they're only going to be able to place you in a limited amount of companies. And that's actually a bad experience. What if your perfect job is actually at a company that doesn't want to pay those fees? I met with my friend Ali Benham, who is the founder of Riviera Partners, which is a search firm here in the Valley. And we basically decided that matching and using data to improve the matching, it's not just matching per keywords, it's actually using real data to understand who you should talk to, was a play we wanted to make. And we hacked something over Christmas. We launched the site. We got a few hires in a quarter. Our business model was awesome. 20% fee. Imagine this, you're a first-time entrepreneur, still French, and you go and suddenly you start to make thousands of dollars every time people get hired. We were profitable. It was awesome, like within 6 months. So what do you do when that happens? Well, you change everything. And that was scary. But basically, we wanted to scale. We want every company in the world on White Truffle, because once we know what companies want, once we know the companies they accept, they pass, we can really build truly a different user experience and a better recruiting. And it was the number one reason why companies were not using White Truffle was because of the fee. So we had to remove it. It was scary. Joseph, my CTO, is here, and we were meeting, and we were like, should we do it? Should we not do it? Should we do it? Not do it? Then I go to an event, and then there is this awesome guy. I forgot his name. He's the CEO of DocuSign. And there was this question in the panel. This guy had this company, and they were making revenues that they didn't like, and they wanted to go somewhere else. And they asked the question to the CEO of DocuSign, and he's like, bad dollars is like drug. Just cut the cord. Just get on with it. Do what you want to do. Came back home, I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. Scary. From one day to another, 0 revenues, nothing. You're the biggest loser on earth. So we moved to a freemium model. And so actually, it's even worse. We moved to a freemium model. So now it's free to use White Truffle. So there's no reasons for company not to use White Truffle. They can post a job, and they can meet as many people as they want. They can hire as many people as they want. It's all good for them. And it's crazy for us. So I'll show you after what actually that did. But the company today is actually doing pretty well. actually really well. 3,500 companies are on the system, 45,000 developers have registered themselves on the system, hundreds of companies have hired with us, Asana, TaskRabbit, Eventbrite, Salesforce. We're only 6 employees, actually probably 7 now. And we raised money from Jerry Yang, Morado Ventures, Kima Ventures, and Scott Bannister, who were basically the people who believed in us when we also were facing the scales problem that Craig mentioned earlier. So that is White Truffle. That is not my title. Anyway, so the way it works is we show an anonymous profile to a company. By the way, this is a new White Truffle. We haven't even launched it yet. It's actually going out in a couple of days. Companies can accept or pass a candidate. When they accept the candidate, we just send the company profile to the candidate. If the candidate accepts, we make an introduction. It's like dating. It's the same thing. The key thing, though, is the data that we use to make those matches. We are a data company. What we do is every time a company clicks accept or pass, we learn something. Every time a candidate accepts or pass, we learn something. If you, as a candidate, I present you to 10 companies, the 10 companies say no, you are not really attractive. If the 10 companies say yes, you are really, really attractive. Attractiveness is key. Now we send you companies to you, and you say no to everybody. You are very picky. So you're attractive and picky, and so on. And then there's a whole other dimension that comes to it, is how do we send you matches? If I have 3 good matches, I should not send you those 3 at once to you. Because if I send you 3, you're going to say yes to 2. You're going to say no to 1 of them. Now, if I send you 6 matches, I put 3 very bad ones and 3 great ones, you're going to say yes to those 3. So all that mechanism actually happens with data. And we have a matching algorithm, and we have a delivery algorithm. We send a limited number of matches, and it is companies can't search. So there is no spamming. It's not possible. They can spam all our candidates. And also, we focus a lot on messaging. Messaging is really important. It's not just about identifying the person. It's about making sure there's a connection that's being made. All right, so we switched to a new business model. Ta-da-da, that was numbers. So that explains to you why I had a very, very bad Christmas, because I still couldn't see really. So in red, it's the number of paying companies on White Truffle. In green, it's our monthly recurring revenue. Actually, it's the worst time to make a change in business model for recruiting is probably around September, October, just before November and December, the dead month. So we did pretty well there. A really smart group of people. And then we start to see picking up. And it's working. And that's actually really, really good. So our business model is very simple. Free for 1 job. Then we have a package called Bacon. I'm telling you, we're really, really smart. And then we have another package called Prosciutto. And we actually ran a test not so long ago where we had another package called Ham. And we're basically sourcing as a service. All right, where are we going? This is how I see the recruiting market. It's a pyramid, W9, post-W9, pre-W9. I'm not going to talk about post-W9 today, but pre-W9, you have 2 main things, sourcing, ATS. Those 2 things actually tend to, these days, there's some overlap between the 2. But there's still a very strong sourcing category of people. The only thing they do is they try to deliver people to you. That's what we do. Now, actually, let's be controversial. Very few people do it well. We're probably the only one doing it well. No, that's not true. But a lot of people, what's happening, there's 2 things that matter in sourcing in a candidate. 2 things, relevancy and intent. You can take every product today. They're going to score high on one of those 2, never the 2, except agencies. But agencies, as we know, are not scalable. But if you make a search on LinkedIn, I'm going to be in trouble in a minute. If you make a search on LinkedIn, right, you're gonna search for who you want, and you're going to find those people. And it's great. They're all there. But you know what? The recruitability of those people is really, really low. Recruitability actually is an extremely important concept if you want to nail the hiring market. And then you can go, and if you let people come to you, so all those candidates on job boards, they can come to you, but then you don't want any of them. We did it with white truffle. And you know what happened? I got pastry chef who applied to my software developer job because they thought we were doing chocolate truffles. So it is a real problem, and that's really why we call it noisy. So we have everything going. Now, to Craig's point, it's actually a very difficult thing to scale. It's really, really difficult. You have to start small. You have to nail the engagement, and then you can add on top of it. So that's why we're only doing tech. And we're actually we're learning every day. We're getting better every day. The thing that's hard is we have to limit the free experience because we want people to upgrade. At the same time, you want to give plenty of introductions. So basically, you always have to balance the business objectives with the user experience. Like VCs want us to have millions of candidates, millions of companies. If you don't have millions, you're nobody. Well, you can't do it. That would be suicide. That's how you end up. I can't tell you how many people told me, why don't you scrape the web and put shadow profiles? So you can show candidates to companies. And then if they want to talk to them, then you can go and talk to the candidate and try to convince them to join your site. I don't care about that. We care about engagement. We care about people being highly engaged. We make, I mean, I can't actually share that number, but the number of hires we're actually making these days is crazy because of that. So the marketplace has a lot of challenges that actually makes us not always very attractive to the traditional market. But we're getting there. Sorry, I hope it was not too long. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. So you've heard from a couple of us, but it would be great to hear a little bit about the rest of the panelists. So I'll turn it over to you, Mark, and maybe you can introduce yourself and your company.
So Venture Rocket is our startup that we began 3.5 years ago. Might as well be an eternity in startup world. Venture Rocket's premise was to find a solution for the abysmally broken job market. We thought it'd be a lot better for everyone if we could sort of introduce job seekers directly to hiring managers, recruiters, employers, rather than going through the whole application process. We wanted to eliminate the resume spam problem. So obviously building a two-sided marketplace, really big challenge. You got to start somewhere. You can't do them both concurrently. So first we worked on getting the jobs. And 3 weeks ago, we rolled out an experiment called Crowd Vitae. So that's why it's a bit weird. Oh, the screen is gone. But so Crowd Vitae is sort of a spun-off product of Venture Rocket, which is essentially a Quora for resumes. The idea being if you can crowdsource resume feedback, and if you're looking for resume feedback, you're obviously looking for work too. And the idea is let's try and get people to make that great first impression. Because at the end of the day, your resume is your personal brand, as they say. So that's what we're doing with Venture Rocket and Crowd Vitae.
Terrific. Shroy?
I'm Shroy Desai. So Guild, we started the business about 2.5 years ago. Luca, who's my co-founder, and I. And I won't belabor the points and challenges in the talent acquisition market, the recruiting market, everything that's been said so far. Alex mentioned, Craig mentioned, we firmly have seen and experienced ourselves in our careers. And I've been around long enough that I remember when recruiting was done in the newspapers and fax machines. And what I have seen, where we are today is there's been a lot of digitization of the recruiting process, right? Resumes are online, job applications are online, which is wonderful, but the side effect has been this noise factor, right? It's so easy with one click, an individual can now apply to hundreds, if not thousands of jobs, and vice versa. With one click, a recruiter can go reach out to thousands of people, right? And it's taken out any personalization in the process. And when you have that much noise in the system, what we started to realize is that recruiters and companies had to create some short form, some other mechanism by which they could try and get to quality, right? So what's not been mentioned so far is this whole idea of quality. It's very easy to find resumes at scale today. It's very easy to apply to jobs at scale today. But how do you find quality candidates at scale? And that's kind of where we started challenging ourselves to think about. So and what we noticed is the criteria or the shortcuts that people are taking or companies are taking today really do not have a very high correlation, ultimately, to success in someone's career. Now, we specialize in software engineers. That's where we've started. That's where we focus today. We're a 2.5-year-old company, so we had to focus someplace. And in the software engineering world, what we see that short form being is things like, we will, if someone went to, did CS program at MIT or CS program at Stanford or Harvard or Carnegie Mellon, well, we'll shortlist them. Okay, that may make some sense, but what about someone who didn't go to one of those programs, but over the years, maybe they taught themselves how to program, and amazing. And so our hypothesis going in was there's an incredible amount of talent out there that actually is being ignored and is not getting its fair due, and which exacerbates this whole problem of shortage right off the bat, right? And then then there's the flip side of it. It's not a meritocratic system. It is not a system where the best people are getting due consideration. It really becomes, even 3 or 4 or 5 years into your career, it goes back to, hey, where did you go to school? Which really doesn't make any sense either, right? I mean, my personal experience working with engineers for years and years and years is some of the best ones didn't go to some of these programs. So the way we've come to solve this problem is, is really unique and only something we've been able to do in the last few years, which is we started leveraging public data. And when I talk about leveraging public data, I'm talking about very deep public data. So developers today are involved in open source communities. They are actually putting code out there. They're collaborating. They are going on open forums and asking questions, answering questions with each other. And there's a richness of data in there that can give true signals around quality. And we've been mining this. So we started very, very focused on looking at open source communities and mining the work that was being done and making predictions based on that. Today, we get information from 100 different sources around the web. And we built more, increasingly sophisticated algorithms to really come at and find what are the signals that predict that someone is going to be highly successful as a software engineer. And then we make all this information available to our customers who are companies that are looking to hire software engineers. So fast forward from where we started today, we have about 300 customers, mostly all over the world, but primarily in the US. And we continue to grow, and it's been a remarkable journey. And what again sustains us, not just solving the problem around bringing the signal and separating the signal from the noise, but also the thing that actually gives us a lot of pleasures when we see these amazing software engineers who don't have pedigree get jobs.
Terrific. Dan?
Great, thank you. Well, I think first of all, it's really great to be here in this room because at the end of the day, the fundamental bottleneck in the global economy is people. If you actually went back 100 years and you asked about what is the thing that is keeping the global economy from making progress, the answer would have been financial capital. The ability for a smart business to get funded was essentially impossible. People that had money had no idea where to put it, and people that had great ideas had no access to the right funds to make their idea happen. And that problem over the last 100 years has been solved to a great extent. I mean, in fact, think about how liquid the market is in the Bay Area around great ideas finding capital. If you have a great idea and you can convince someone that your great idea has legs, you can get funding. The truth is, though, that the #1 problem today is no longer financial capital, it's human capital. And in fact, if you actually go to entrepreneurs and you ask them, a lot of them, why they raise money, one of the reasons they raise money is so that they can hire people. Because by raising money from a pedigreed firm, that provides a signal to the marketplace that their idea is worth betting someone's career on. And it's actually that brand, as much as the dollars that come with that, that is why people raise money with prestigious firms. And so what I would ask all of you to draw a higher order conclusion of in the global economy right now, GDP growth on a global basis will thrive or not based on the efficiency with which human capital finds the right opportunity. And it's worth asking yourself why that's a problem. And at the end of the day, it's a data problem, right? And I think the comment made earlier about quality at scale, that is absolutely the global problem in talent. And whether you're in New York or San Francisco or Beijing or Jakarta or Seoul or Australia, it doesn't matter where you are. People in recruiting around the world are facing the exact same problem, which is I used to live in a world where only a small number of people at the top of the company mattered to find an amazing person. And I had a huge swath of semi-skilled labor where finding someone okay was good enough. And that's just not the way people compete anymore. I mean, winning or losing in your market is based on whether you have not just good, but amazing talent in key roles throughout the organization. And so if you're a recruiting organization, operating in that world is a fundamentally harder challenge than operating in a world where you needed someone sufficient, but didn't necessarily need someone amazing. And so now the question is, well, how do I create a quality signal at scale? And our answer has been that we need to open up the world to the 80% of people that aren't looking for work. Because most of the solutions historically in talent have been based on trying to pull a needle out of a haystack of people that are job seekers. And the truth is that that's a lot of where the noise comes from. You have people that are highly seeking a job, and they're applying to every job they can find. And the truth is that once you're being barraged by all those people, finding the right person is incredibly hard. And so once you make that leap into a world where you realize that where you're going to recruit from is not people that are looking for work, but the people that aren't looking for work, you have two things to solve for. First is you have a data issue. How do I actually access information by people that aren't looking for work? Because why would they put their information out there for me to consume? They have no intent. And the other reason is that once you make that leap into a world where you're trying to recruit people that aren't looking for work, that's a sales and marketing problem. Let me tell you that sales and marketing is the last thing that a recruiting organization is used to doing. Think about it. Like, what's your experience with recruiting organizations? It is more of an administrative back office function classically. And yet, if you look at the leading organizations around the Bay Area and around the world, what you're seeing is that those organizations are re-architecting their whole system to deploy a sales and marketing process as opposed to a historical recruitment process. And so that changes the people you're hiring, that changes the tools you're deploying, and it changes your uses of data. And so if I were sort of to encourage all of you to think about the problem, I would say, how do you create a high quality signal at scale? And then how do you help organizations re-architect the way they actually recruit to facilitate that process? If you can solve that problem, good luck, because that is a hard problem.
So Dan, I mean, that's a great lead-in. So there are a lot of companies, I think, are now thinking pretty creatively about that engagement mechanism, whether it's some of the algorithms that you talked about, Alex, or even a more basic hot or not kind of, do I like that person's background, swipe right or left, or in fact, there was an exhibitor out here in the demo room which has a pretty clever way of creating challenges for coders to come on that's very attractive for them to solve problems within their technology domain, have it evaluated slightly after they've completed it, and then allow them to engage in a real-time collaborative session. So what do people think about some of these, I don't want to call them gimmicks, but they're definitely not your grandfather's way of engaging, right? I mean, they're new. What do people think about the longevity of those engagement patterns, and what do people think about that?
Yeah, I think that one of the issues with that, to Dan's point, is that I think you continue to only limit yourself to the people who are looking for jobs. At least in a lot of the examples that come to mind over here. And I just don't think that's a sufficient pool anymore. And I do think we've gone to a world, I think it used to be a world where, it broke very cleanly into either you're looking for a job or you're not looking for a job. And that, what's really muddied is there's a lot of people kind of in the middle over there. I'm not actively looking for a job, but if the right thing came along, I may jump on it. And how do you actually, engage with those people? I think that's the real challenge.
Well, to that point, I think that our research suggests that basically the world breaks into three categories. There's 20% of people that are looking for work. They're either out of work or they hate what they're doing. And so they're going on to Google, they're going on to Indeed, they're coming on to LinkedIn, and they're searching, right? And those people are easy to find. And then there's a separate problem of can you pull out the wheat from the chaff in that pool. Then there's 60% of the population that isn't looking, but if you showed them the right thing, they would absolutely like a conversation, particularly if you have a brand that they believe in. And then there's 20% that couldn't be bothered. And so the question becomes, if you think about going after that 60% as a sales and marketing process, the more effort you require of them to participate in that process, the less likely they are to engage. It's like going to a customer and saying, I'd love to sell something to you, but could you please fill out this 20-page questionnaire first so I can decide whether you'd be a good customer for us? It's like, why would they want to do that? And so you almost see the successful tools now going the opposite direction, which is how do I create the lightest weight experience possible? Like reason mobile apply is so interesting for people that are job seeking is because it's like one click. I could essentially see a job that's targeted to me, and if it's right, I could sort of express interest. The other thing is that the first step for most of those people is not application. Right? We got this wrong when we first started. The first thing you ask a person that isn't looking for work to do is not apply. You want to have a chat. And so you need to rethink the whole process of how that 60% gets engaged. But I agree with you completely. If you can put the right thing in front of them, they will absolutely take interest.
Yeah,
That's a really good.
No, good.
I was just to say that's a really great point. That's the whole premise with Venture Rocket. We wanted to make it so that, for example, the entire onboarding process is just one click. I think one big problem today, actually, well, the two main problems we saw was, first of all, to the point earlier, you shouldn't be allowed to apply to every single job on the planet. And furthermore, it's 2014. It shouldn't be an actual search process. It should be a discovery process. I mean, one weird analogy that I like to make, in a totally different industry, admittedly, so kayak.com, right? I mean, so it was a travel aggregator, like many. The reason why Kayak is so great, it completely removed the search element from finding a flight or a hotel. You literally just discover what you're looking for right then and there. So on the one hand, I completely agree. Finding the right job, or for that matter, talent, it should be a very sort of lightweight approach. On the other hand, to the point of whether you can just apply every single job you want, that's what needs to be fixed. So to put it another way, there needs to be an actual filtering mechanism. Now, weirdly, we've seen this in many places, right? So if you look at even as far back as high school, you can't apply to every single university. Well, you could, but it'd be very, very expensive. And that's actually a pretty effective filter. Similarly for patents, I remember when we were doing our patent, it was one of the most maddening things I've done in my life. And then I found out very plainly, it's intentionally complicated. They want to filter people from needlessly filing frivolous patents. Oh wait, that doesn't actually work so well though. But that's the idea anyway. So clearly that doesn't work. But yes, that's the idea. Is it has to be on the one hand lightweight, on the other hand it has to be a proper filtering mechanism and showing to people exactly those jobs for which they're a good fit, and that's it.
So one of the questions that we were discussing in advance of this panel, and it's already popped up here on this device, is you know, the valley and the coasts are sort of unique geographies, right? There's scarcity, there's capital available, there's a certain sort of rules of engagement that we've kind of almost pre-programmed developers and other talent to. That's how they interact with recruiters. This is how they interact with hiring managers. This is how they interact with their peer group. And what about the rest of the country and places where you know, they still have the same problems? They still are looking for great people to scale really interesting companies, but they're not in the bubbles that we're in. And specifically, what are your solutions doing to be extensible to those populations? Because I hope that that's part of the game plan of all of you, is not just to solve the coasts.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, you're absolutely right, Craig, which is, it's very easy, right, to get excited about what's going on here in the Valley. But the reality is majority of the hiring that's going on is between the two coasts. And, you know, so we have a lot of customers. I mean, majority of our customers in the middle of the country. And now we only focus on software engineers, so I kind of can present that view. You know, one of the biggest things we see is, you know, biggest differences is a lot of those companies actually do not have the recruiting infrastructure that exists on the coast, right? I mean, if you're a startup here, or if you are, you know, rapidly growing startup, you actually have experienced tech recruiters. You actually have engineers who know what they're looking for. You start going in the middle of the country and, you know, some mid-sized to larger companies, engineering is a small piece of the portfolio. they actually don't know what constitutes a great engineer. They don't have a tech recruiter on staff, as an example. So now there's a lot more burden in the solution that we have to provide. So actually, what we see a lot more traction in a lot of those companies. Actually, for us, it's easier to sell into them because we are giving these quality signals because they don't even have the short form language that I talked about earlier. Right? They haven't even developed it. So that really helps them out. And then the flip side that Dan talked about is really about the outreach. You can't, the days of spamming, just hundreds of people out there and say, are you interested in this job? I mean, that doesn't work. I mean, recruiters still keep doing it. But how do you give insights into an individual? How do you give them something personal about that person so you can make an outreach that is more personalized? And that's something we work on quite a bit, providing some of those intelligence and tools.
Maybe I could provide a little bit of spectrum, given we have about 25,000 customers around the world. And there's sort of two dimensions that we could talk about. The first is there's the recruitment sophistication dimension, and to sort of compare what it feels like out here to, say, in a place like Beijing. So unless you're in technology in Beijing, if you walk into the average company, you say, can I meet your recruiting team? They will look at you like you're crazy, because there's actually not a profession called recruiting there. They haven't done that yet. And that seems crazy, but the truth is that recruiting is an evolution of how talent works. In most companies, a long time ago, there was just HR. And a part of everyone in the HR team's job was they spent 10% recruiting people. Now, what the Valley learned first, and now what the rest of the world is sort of catching up to, is that recruiting is a profession that is actually quite different as a skill set than the rest of HR. If you go to China, that hasn't happened yet. So if you think about providing a solution to the Chinese market, you need to basically make it as lightweight as possible so that you're presenting them with great people so that the search process happens for them. And the process of the sales and marketing approach isn't really a process that market's ready for yet. So, and by the way, in Brazil, it's the same thing. And in Malaysia, it's the same thing. And this evolution of recruiting just hasn't happened yet. The other dimension I'd talk about is small business. So we serve clients everywhere from about $5,000 a year to $5 million a year. And one of the key things that we've realized is that brand is everything when it comes to recruiting passive talent. And one of the things about brand is that you can talk about companies that have great brands or bad brands. That's actually an inefficient way to talk about branding. The right way to talk about branding is every company has a great brand for who? Right? Think about it. Everyone in this room has a list of companies that if they called you tomorrow, you'd be happy to take a phone call. And there are probably some commonalities around that list. But the truth is everyone probably has a slightly different list. And if you look around the world at what that list is in people's minds, it's going to vary. So the question is, can anyone figure out how to find the talent that has an affinity towards you as a company in your market? And we actually think that on LinkedIn, there are a number of signals that will give us information of perhaps you don't have a great brand in general, but we can show you the 10,000 people you have a great brand for.
That's a great point. Alex, we talked about this sales and marketing. Dan mentioned the sales and marketing approach. Do you have to modify, do you have to retrain customers to sort of engage at a different level for your solutions or any of the startups here? Is there an education process? Are you guys driving that? Has LinkedIn already been driving that? How do you think about that within the current market today?
Well, there is clearly a way, and we see it. So again, when we look at the data, we can find correlations between what companies get rejected the most and what companies get accepted the most, and we can look at what are the commonalities, and we can even offer to some companies some A/B testing so they can try different messaging and see what works. It's really interesting. Like you do see major differences between people who are very lightweight they don't really care about their recruiting. They just think putting something out there will work versus people who really care about it. So that's one thing that's really important. I think the second thing that's back to I think Dan's point is a friend of mine, a recruiter, always tells me that he thinks he's in the business of telling parents they have an ugly child. Because basically, if you like, and it goes back to the theme of quality and recruitability, is every company has this image of this, how is it, like the purple squirrel? Like this person who went to Stanford and worked at Facebook and Google, and they all want to hire that. The thing is, none of them are actually going to hire that person. And actually conveying that message to companies is a very difficult thing. And if you try to productize that, that's actually a very, very big challenge. How do you set expectations? How do you actually tell them, hey, we know you want this, but you're not going to have this. If you have this, it's going to be a failure.
That's super interesting. Just a side point, I spend a lot of my time with young founding entrepreneurs, founders and entrepreneurs, and some of them are super sophisticated around recruiting, and they just get it. They've been thinking about those first few hires from day -2, and they're already scoping out the people that they want to go after that are going to make them, really continue on that trajectory. And then there are others that don't. And to your point about educate around the purple squirrel, sometimes you have to empower them to go and shoot as high as they can, knowing that they're not going to achieve that. But the good ones figure it out. They recognize then that they need a critical engineering hire to go after that CTO that they want. They realize that their UI has got to improve, or they're not going to be able to attract any of the top product talent in the market, or the fact that they don't even know what a data scientist does is going to seriously inhibit their ability to leverage analytics as a competitive weapon. And
as an anecdote, like what recruiters do when they meet a company, and every company asks them the same thing, especially when it's in tech, the same type of people. The recruiter calls their friends who matches that profile. They say, hey, listen, I'll buy you a drink, but do you mind taking a meeting with that person? 20 minutes, just say no to them. So the meeting happens, and then the recruiter can go to the company and say, look, you see, you can't have those people. They're all going to say no to you. If you want to have 5 more line up, and they're all going to say no. And now can we talk actually about somebody you can actually recruit?
Right. What do the panelists, what do you guys think of the recruiting community? And are they friend, foe, or are they a channel partner? I mean, obviously you guys sell to them. But what do folks think about the recruiting business, the intermediaries themselves?
I mean, obviously they exist for a reason, because it is hard for companies. There's a shortage of talent. So, I mean, there's frustration, and that frustration usually ends up being, okay, even though I know I'm going to end up paying like a 20%, first-year compensation fee, I'm so desperate that I'm going to go do that. So it exists for a reason. I think, and my observations, I think it breaks into, I think there are some great recruiting firms out there that can really help you, and there are others that aren't. But in an ideal world, if all of us here do our jobs right, then that should be shrinking.
Yeah. Just another observation, certain recruiters are getting very sophisticated around data. I mean, they are on the leading edge of deploying solutions, and I've been blown away by some of the portfolio companies of ours that work with recruiters, and web-based tools that are measuring in real time where candidates are in the process. It's encouraging, I guess, from my perspective.
An interesting stat is that on LinkedIn, one of the things we can do is we can track the top 10 in-demand skills around the world. We can look at all the demand coming at all the talent and sort of which skills are people most in pursuit of. And recruiting is actually a top 10 skill, believe it or not. So it's up there with data science and social media marketing and credit risk and sort of these things that make or break companies. And the truth is that whether the recruiting talent sits within the corporation or sits outside the corporation is sort of irrelevant. That's a sourcing build by partner model question, right? But there's still a demand, whether it's outside of that company or in that company, to provide them with the right tools to be effective. But to sort of say that will go away is kind of like saying that Salesforce.com is going to get rid of salespeople,
right?
Right, which is, maybe on the margin it makes people more productive, but it's almost in assistance of the profession as opposed to in replacement of the profession.
Back to the point about recruiting skills, just again, another observation from the VC chair. I'd say it's one of the top criteria we use to evaluate deals is the team's ability to recruit talent, and either demonstrated by who are the founders and the core people around the table, but even more sort of putting in front of them some really exceptional talent and see how people react to that type of recruiting style. It's critically important. So it should be top of mind for all the entrepreneurs in the room. We really focus on it. We care deeply about it because at the end of the day, we know that the company is going to scale or not based on their ability to attract talent. What areas are exciting to you? Mark, what's exciting to you right now in the landscape besides your business and where you're in the trenches fighting every day, but what are you excited about in the world of talent and what's happening out there in the market?
Well, I'll be excited when it really happens. I mean, I think the thing that's really we're all trying to hope for and work towards is this notion, I think that first begins, there needs to be sort of a transformation, I think, socially towards the importance of sort of the severity of the problem we're all trying to solve. Unfortunately, usually there just isn't that same sort of passion surrounding the job market generally. It's not sort of up there in the same category of things like, I don't know, world hunger and disease and political turmoil around the world, which is a bit weird when you think about it, because in the absence of a proper working force, I mean, hang on, let me back up. I grew up playing SimCity as a little kid. And the first thing you want for a city is great education and great, jobs for everybody. And weirdly then, we haven't sort of gone full circle to realize if this thing isn't made more efficient, then none of these problems are ever going to be solved. And it's a bit alarming because I remember a few years ago I discovered from talking with some people at some company, doesn't matter who or where, that they said something which kind of really scared me, that there's almost an incentive economically to keep the job market as inefficient as possible from an economic point of view. I mean, isn't it a bit weird, for example, that so many products and services require so many people to spend so much money without necessarily getting anything? I mean, that's just bizarre. And frankly, it's pretty shameful, and I think it just needs to change. And granted, there's a lot of companies that now are changing that, and that's great, that's awesome. Obviously, White Truffle, you guys switched to a freemium model, and that's fantastic, things like that. So that's part of it, but I think at the end of the day, the really important thing is there just isn't this passionate sort of human level concern to solve this problem, and I really wish that would sort of evolve over time.
So is LinkedIn, in your position as an industry leader, can you guys affect and try to move the industry along that and that education? Is that part of what you guys think about in terms of, is the system broken and how do we fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we take very seriously the role that we can potentially play in the global labor market. I mean, our solutions last year helped over 1 million people find new jobs. And that's a drop in the bucket relative to the total potential 3.3 billion people that earn a living every day. And so we take it very seriously. I think that one of the nice dynamics that we believe is happening is that in a world where there's a much more efficient marketplace around talent, one of the things that happens is that companies invest in their employees more. Right? Think about it. Like in a world where, as my dad told me this story, where one day he got promoted and someone walked to his desk and said, "Congratulations, you're now at this level. Here's your phone book." Because at that time, a phone book was a sacred prized possession in the company. Only the most senior people had it, because the idea is that if you left, then you could start calling everyone and inviting them to leave. And so it was a world where you were invisible as an employee. And in that environment, think about how much that company really cares about you. Cares about investing in you, cares about your work-life balance, cares about are you pursuing your career objectives. And now compare that to today where it's a free market. I mean, we have the ability to, if we're not happy with what we're doing, find something new, assuming we have the right skills. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is that this whole recruiting thing that we're talking about is going to create a massive push for companies to invest more in their own people, which I think will lead to skill development and lead to retraining and lead to all sorts of wonderful benefits in addition to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in that vein, the intersection between what is going on in the education market and what is, I think, the impact that can have on recruiting and, HR in general is something, I think about quite a bit. And there's a lot of, when you look at the MOOCs out there, the massively open online courses, et cetera, everyone thinks that may change the higher education market. I actually think that's going to be less likely. I think it's way more likely that a lot of those MOOCs are going to evolve into becoming really outsourced, very efficient skill development platforms for companies. Because I agree with Dan. I think companies need to invest more in their people, but we no longer also live in a world where when you joined, at least when I got out of school, I did not do this, but if you happen to go join a large company like IBM, you'd go enter a 7 to 12-month training program. That doesn't happen anymore. But I think the opportunity to take a lot of these online solutions and create that kind of ongoing training program and skills development is something we're going to see happen. And I think that's where these two markets are going to end up rubbing up against each other.
That's actually a really interesting point to hit on. We're going to wind up now and over the next 5 years having for the first time a global, not just us, I mean generally the space, the first global index of career paths. It's never happened before, right? Like, you're here, you want to do this, here's how 50,000 people made that transition. Here are the most probable ones. You don't have this skill. You'd be more likely to go to this employer than that employer if this is your ultimate goal. And I think that having students, for example, like you go and ask students, how did you pick your first job? And you're like, well, I went to a barbecue with my family, and my uncle, who's got a cool car, told me he's an accountant. Maybe I'll be an accountant, right? And then like a year later, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to be an accountant. But I mean, like the lack of data that exists in people navigating their careers is just fundamental. And it's a data problem. Like, it's nothing but a data problem. It's like no one's ever been able to collect it all in one place and then being able to tie the different nodes together through paths over time. And we're going to solve that problem. I think the hard part about it is that no one knows what they want to do. That's a harder problem. If you can figure out how to help people actually figure out what they're going to like and what's going to get them fired up every day, that's like a more human problem that I think
actually,
is
and I think, deal. I mean, and I want to hear from Mark, but I think mentoring is such an important part of this whole piece. And I personally have looked at a lot of companies in and around that area because I do think that people are going to have the biggest impact of educating other people about paths and opportunities. And to do that in a scalable, technology-enabled fashion is a really exciting thing. I mean, think about if a recent Stanford graduate could sit down with the 5 of us on Skype or some other video call and say, should I take these electives? Should I take an internship with Facebook, or should I go to the Peace Corps? And that's a very powerful mechanism, is people helping people in mentorship that's technology enabled. So
no, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, that's a really good point. One of the sort of catalysts for us building VR was this notion that, gosh, coming out of school, I had a pretty weirdly varied background of studies, and I genuinely had no idea what sort of a job I should be applying for. I knew exactly what I could do, and somewhat impressively, I knew what I couldn't do too, which was at least somewhat of a help. But yeah, I had no idea what to actually search for. In fact, if I'm honest, even today, I have no idea what I would search for if I were looking for a job. But I do know what I can do. So if there were a way to just sort of brain dump all this stuff, your abilities, your skills, and just have things sort of magically appear, well, that would be pretty awesome. That would be great.
Terrific. I'm not sure if, are we getting questions on this as well? They're sort of popping up. I guess in terms of where the market's headed, I've been curious when I knew Dan was going to be on the panel, not to set you up, but how are you viewed? How is LinkedIn viewed within the startup community, and how are you guys actively? Are you going to be a rapid acquirer here? We talked a little bit on the panel before. There's perhaps areas that are interesting that are maybe subscale for you guys to pursue as a primary corporate objective. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on all the activity that's kind of now pointed right at this space, and you guys are sitting in a pretty interesting position.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say about our business is that we're roughly $1 billion business for LinkedIn, which surprisingly makes us the largest player in the space. Sort of amazing to think about. Like, think about how much money do companies spend on people? It's like trillions of dollars, right? And yet, in the space of human capital, no one's found scalable solutions to create big markets. And so I think we're incredibly excited, not just about where we are, but the massive road ahead for us. I think that also one of the things to recognize about the space is that it's been devoid of fundamental innovation for a long time. And so when we look at a lot at the companies in the space, we get very excited when we find people doing fundamentally new things. And the truth is that most people right now are, I would say to the point earlier, living in the valley world of, I started a company, this is like very common I hear. I started a company, I was going after like children's clothes, e-commerce for children's clothes, and I couldn't hire an engineer. And I was like, well, that's the problem I want to solve. So I'm going to start a company to help people hire engineers because I couldn't hire one. And that's actually a very small problem in the global scheme of talent. And so I guess I would just encourage everyone who's going after this to think more horizontally around the question of quality signal at scale. If you can solve that problem, that is a much larger world benefit. It's a much larger problem, and we would be very interested in talking to you. We would be very interested in talking to you. I was just saying that, that a lot of the solutions we see tend to be wrapped up in a valley mentality, which is, how do I find the best person in the class, and how do I get what's essentially a small amount of talent into my company? Finding, if you go and ask a teacher, tell me in a class of 25, who's your best 2 students, they could probably get it pretty close. But if you say, who's my second quartile, like who's kind of in that 50 to 75% bracket, that's a really hard problem. And that's actually the problem that most companies are facing is, how do I find good to great? I'm not looking for the best in the class. Maybe I can't attract the best in the class. And so anyone that can solve the problem of finding data to deliver quality at scale is just, that's a much bigger problem than solving the valley problem of, how do I hire my first engineer? That's a very narrow problem.
What do people think about privacy in this whole discussion, and recognizing that we're leaving digital breadcrumbs, and we're curating our own profiles on LinkedIn, and you're looking at publicly available data to build composites, and you've got algorithms, and you know which companies are hot and which people are hot and which aren't. Has privacy come up in these discussions? And is there a point where people, in the same way that certain social networks, people dial the knob down and say, you know what, I've shared enough. I'm not going to post photos of my kids anymore. How do you think about privacy in this whole space?
Well, so at least let me speak from our lens. So number one, we don't, from a data standpoint, we don't look at anything that is not public, right? So we're not looking at pictures someone is posting on their Facebook and things like that, because number one, it's not relevant. And again, we're all about trying to find that quality signal, and any data points that are not relevant towards that, you don't want anything to do with that. So first of all, I think there's a responsibility, and it's kind of interesting as we just kind of raised around our financing end. We don't get this customer, actually, I should say, customers don't ask us this question. We actually, when we first launched, my biggest concern was that developers will find out what we do, and we're going to have like massive uproar on our hands. Like, they're going to be pissed off that you guys are doing this. That was probably my number one concern. In the 2.5 years, and we have a very clear policy that if someone doesn't want their profile to be in the system, we will, no questions asked, remove it. I was in the 2.5 years we've been doing this, maybe a dozen developers have emailed us and said, please remove my profile. And I would say probably hundreds have emailed us with their resume, saying, I want to make sure I'm in your database. So it's really fascinating, because what I was worried about didn't quite happen. And again, the question really, the customers really don't, it comes up, but it's a very clear answer. We're only looking at public data. But then we're going and getting investment dollars. That was a much bigger question. But we have a responsibility, and I think this is going to be really important for any company that's trying to play in this area. Because ultimately, what you do with this data is probably the more important point than kind of what data you're mining, et cetera. And the responsibility is, at the end of the day, we are really trying to help people find jobs. So we're not out there trying to find dirt on people. That's really not our angle whatsoever. It is really about, how do we know what they're great at, and therefore we can help them find those right opportunities.
How about from LinkedIn's perspective?
Well, from our perspective, our members are in complete control of their profile. So one of the value propositions of LinkedIn is, it is your professional profile of record. It is your online brand in your professional life. And so to even to do anything that would compromise someone's ownership or control of that space is something that we wouldn't wouldn't consider. Now, I think what's interesting is that are there signals that you can find, and for us it's really LinkedIn, signals on LinkedIn in terms of behavior that allows us to put something interesting in front of someone that they wouldn't have gone and sought on their own. And that's really using data in service of the person, not in service of a third party. I think that once you start thinking about how do I start to infer things in service of a third party, that's where you got to be a little more careful. But for us, I mean, privacy is paramount. It's, you know, LinkedIn is based on, I mean, think about it. You're entrusting data to a company that potentially, if they messed it up, could put at risk your economic fulfillment. Like, that's a very sacred bond, and we hold that very seriously.
Some of the companies that I've been looking at, I mentioned one on the slide, this company Hourly Nerd, which I'm excited about personally, potentially can change the scope of labor in this country. I mean, we look at groups of people, you know, people have called, you know, McKinsey moms, or consultants that don't want to be on the road, you know, 4 days a week and be away from their families. To what extent does the panel, because you guys see this on the front lines, do you think that the labor and the workforce in this country will change substantially, and that people will look for new ways to earn a living?
Well, you see, I think there is clearly an evolution, right? Like 20 years ago, you would have one or maybe two jobs in your lifetime, and today you get, I think my son, who's 18 months old, may get 25 jobs. But I think what we see clearly a shift now. Before, the corporation was the entity, and I think what you see more now, especially in tech, the software developer is the entity. Like, it's his own brand now, and I think what that starts to create is that they start to kind of, it's their life, it's their, you know, their life is more important than the corporation. And so you suddenly start to see people working more and more, I mean, except at Yahoo apparently, but more and more working from home, working remotely. Like, we have a huge amount of companies on White Truffle who actually say, I have no problem having somebody based in Phoenix, even though I'm based here. And you see that more and more and more, and you see more companies, and it's probably also amplified by the shortage of talent here, because they have to be more creative, they have to find new ways to attract people. But I think you do see a complete, I mean, in tech, it's a complete different way of working.
Well, I think, you know, the point Dan made earlier, which is, look, as there's more efficiency in the marketplace, and as it becomes easier for people to find new opportunities, right? Which is happening. With all the problems that we're talking about over here, and we complain about, the fact of the matter is there has been more efficiency in the marketplace, and which is why we are seeing people able to switch jobs more frequently, et cetera. I think personal fulfillment is becoming more important to people. So to your point, which is, I don't want to travel as much, potentially. And, you know, now I can go find an opportunity, and it is easier to go find an opportunity, or it's easier for an opportunity to find me. I think as those things happen, we are seeing that people are valuing some other criteria that maybe, you know, 20 years ago that wasn't so much of a choice for them. And I think that's going to continue to happen. I think that's a good thing.
I'll make two predictions on the comment, a sort of a little bit different take. I think first prediction is that we will not see a disintegration of the traditional employee-employer relationship. If you go back in time, so like take a company like Elance or Odesk, or there's a bunch of people that have tried to come up with this labor on demand kind of model, and the articles that are written about those companies today, you can search back 12 years ago and find the exact same articles written about, you know, this is taking over the world, the disintegration of the traditional employer-employee relationship, fragmentation of labor. It just hasn't played out. So I don't know that we understand why that's the case, and whether that's a cultural challenge, a technical challenge that will be solved by someone, but it's not as obvious as I think some people like to report about. The other prediction I'll make is that I think someone will solve the McKinsey mom problem and do a tremendous service to the world and make a ton of money in the process. There is a ton of talent that exists that doesn't want a traditional relationship with their employer, and they have a tremendously skilled, and there is not a model right now that works well for them. And most of them would be willing to work at a fraction of what a traditional employee would cost to have engagement, to have fulfillment, to maybe even onboard and transition themselves back in the workforce. And yet no one's figured out how to solve that problem. Like if I were you and I was thinking about a problem to go after, like that would be very worth it.
We've got a company, Early Nerd, that's doing exactly that. So check it out. It's pretty exciting. It's out of the other school on the other coast.
So someone here should go after our nerd.
Well, I know we're a little pressed for time, but we've got a lot of good questions here. I guess having Alex, if you and Mark would just tell your own funding stories, I think that with a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to hear how you guys got funded.
You want to start?
Sure. It's a lot of work. It took a lot of time. I mean, obviously, at the very broadest level, you need at least one, if not better yet, two of two things. Really great traction, really great revenue. At the time, we had neither, frankly. And even if you do have those two things, you need at least a great team. And I say with a lot of pride that that's what we had then. And what we were doing and what we're trying to do is obviously a very different angle to what currently exists. And really, in our case, it was a matter of being lucky enough to find a group of investors who really are just deeply rooted in the HR space. So they really sort of intuitively got what we were trying to do. They understood and appreciated the risk, and I think that's actually why they liked it so much, because it was so genuinely different. So really, it's a matter of, you need those two, obviously, those two data points, but at the end of the day, it really is your team. I mean, we've all heard it, but it is really, really true. You need that team. That's what they invest in.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you see the good side when you read TechCrunch and you see all the funding announcements. It seems easy and cool, but it's actually really, really hard. Most people say no to you, and you just have to know that. Now, actually, I've done some meetings where I start now and I say, hey, don't worry, I know you're gonna say no, but let's still have a nice conversation. Because they still send their companies to us, so still client. I think there is, so clearly the team is extremely important. I mean, per Mark's point, it's the number one thing. They invest in you, and which makes it harder when they say no, because when they say no, it means they don't believe in you, and you being you personally, so take that. The second thing is, I think, you just have to go at it. So you have to build a business. That's the number one thing. If you don't build a business, nobody's going to invest in you. So you have to, once you have the team, go and build a business, get traction, get customers, get a product that you like, get people used, get feedback. I personally feel that in the recruiting world, the bar is actually higher than in the consumer world because of the scale problem. Like a photo sharing site, you can pretty easily get it to a few thousand users in a week or two. A recruiting site is much harder, and then get people engaged is really hard. So we felt, for us, the whole way we felt it was like twice as hard as anybody else. I mean, you see some apps that just send you 1-2 words and they raise $1 million like this. And I think for us, what the key thing was. We started with a small round because we felt there was really a lot of pressure around people pushing us for scale. And we felt that this is the wrong way to approach it. So what we did is we went to friends and family, who are still friends, by the way, and we basically raised a very small round of $400,000. And that just got us a year. And we thought that we could start to build the signals to basically go and raise more afterwards. As part of those friends, you have to be smart in how you pick your friends sometimes. As part of those friends, we had one person who I used to work at Yahoo with before. And one day, we go to Sonoma and on a trip, and we get quite drunk, actually. If I remember well, I think I was lying down on the limo on the floor, and I was talking to him, and I'm like, how is it that why don't we get like Jerry and all those guys at Yahoo? They should invest in our company. And then he's like sitting there and he says, yeah, I think you're right. I'll get you a meeting on Monday. I go back home, I get sober, I don't really think about it, get an email over the weekend where actually I'm meeting with Jerry Yang the week after. And I explained to Jerry what we're doing. And Jerry being Jerry, he's a totally amazing person. He, end of the meeting, is like, yeah, we'll help you. And 2 weeks later, a phone call with the numbers, and that's how we raise our round. Another investor, which is actually quite funny, I never thought about this, Scott Bannister actually saw our ads on Facebook. And he contacted me through our ads.
Cool.
And he's like, hey, I want to speak to you.
Well, can I just add one quick thing?
Yeah.
It just triggered a memory. One thing that a lot of people have asked me over the years is, how do you decide whether you want to do something, do a startup? How do you know whether you're going to keep going and keep pushing to get the funding? Because it is, brain distortingly painful. Or I should say heart distortingly painful. And it's weird. It's not like you just sort of wake up one day and you think to yourself, oh, I think I'd like to do a startup today. Oh, I think I'm going to have a filet mignon today. It's not like that. You're just kind of compelled to do it. It's not really a conscious decision. It's not something you just think you'd like to do. You just sort of find yourself doing it. And as long as that's the primary drive, as long as there's a real need and there's a demand for what you're doing, as long as you yourself want your own product, things find a way. You will eventually find a way.
That's cool. Do we have a few minutes for questions? OK, perfect. I'm just going to ask a few questions. Anyone in the audience want to talk to the panel? Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the more exciting
I think, if you look at the evaluation process today, it's deeply flawed when you think about it, right? It's all about people going in and doing interviews, and most people are really not trained to do that effectively. And usually, each interview just replays the same thing. So, and a couple of different organizations are coming at it differently. I know of some companies that are doing, trying to do more scalable interview training, things like that. But I also think data can play a role in there. I think at the end of the day, the selection decision will still be very much a human decision, because there's so much about the personal connection and the chemistry. But I do think that at least the way we've thought about it and keep thinking about it, there is a role for data to play a role in there, and at least inform that process.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. One way to think about it is, one of the things we've learned is that if we were to look at LinkedIn and guess who your next employee was at any company, the most likely population is a first-degree connection of an existing employee. And so that's interesting from a sourcing perspective, but it's actually even more interesting from an evaluation perspective, because someone at your company knows this person. Someone at your company probably worked beside this person. And yet, how many recruiting processes figure that out? Like none. And if it happens at the end of the interview cycle. It's like the last thing you do before you make the offer. And oftentimes it's like a save. It's like, oh, you saw an offer letter on someone's desk. Please don't hire that person. I worked with them at the prior job. They were horrendous. Or, whatever the situation is. So I think that there's a data angle. I think that assessment at a company level is a somewhat intractable data problem, because it is so specific to situation and context and culture. That you can get close, but you can't get there. But what you can do, your best signal, is if someone at your company worked with this person, that is the best data signal you could possibly have. And we just don't know when those things happen often enough.
Terrific. I'm going to actually end there because I want to stay on time. But I want to thank the panelists for joining us tonight. And I think it was a great discussion. So thanks, everyone.